There's a children's book. It's named The Runaway Bunny. It was written by Margaret Wise Brown. This book was published for the first time in 1942, and it has never gone out of print. It's just that well loved. That's very unusual for a children's book. And it begins like this. Once there was a little bunny who wanted to run away, so he said to his mother, "I am running away." "If you run away," said his mother, "I will run after you, for you are my little bunny." Turn the page, and the bunny is telling his mother that if she runs after him, he will turn into a fish and swim away from her. Turn the page, and she counters by saying that if he becomes a fish in the stream, she will become a fisherman and fish for him. Turn again, and you get this 2-page spread of Mom fly fishing with a carrot as bait, trying to catch her little fleeing bunny. You can see where the story is going. Page after page, this continues. Whatever the little bunny wants to become in order to run away from Mom, she is determined to become whatever she must in order to pursue after him and catch her or find her little bunny. He decides to become a rock on a high mountain, and she decides to become a mountain climber. He decides to become a bird to fly away, and she responds, "If you become a bird and fly away from me, I will be a tree that you come home to." Love that. And so it goes until the end, until the bunny finds himself exhausted from trying to come up with another idea. "Shucks," says the bunny finally, I might as well just stay where I am and be your little bunny." I know I choked up there a little bit because it's just so touchy. Yeah. And the story emulates the heart of the gospel. It really does. The good news is the story of God's passionate pursuit of his runaways who don't know how much they are loved. And it's the story of humanity fleeing and hiding in a garden like Adam and Eve, or like Jonah who gets on a ship for far off Tarshish and tries to flee from God. In children's book form, how might God tell the story of Jonah? "If you flee in a ship, I will become a storm that will rock you to get your attention. And if you land in the sea, I will become a fish that swallows you so that you will not drown, in hopes that you decide to come home to me." Isn't that great? Well, we're going to continue our study of runaway Jonah. This is week 3 in our study, just 4 chapters in the book of Jonah. I ended up last week by giving you an easy way to remember chapter 1. So I'll begin there. Here was the summary. God said, "Go." Jonah said, "No." God said, "Blow." Jonah said, "Throw." And the sailors said, "Whoa." Work through that again. For those of you who weren't here, God said, "Go." Jonah, go and tell the Ninevites that judgment is coming upon them. My judgment. Go, Jonah. Jonah said, "No." And he said no because he hated the wicked Ninevites. And he knew that God was compassionate and merciful and forgiving. And he knew that God might relent in bringing punishment on the Ninevites and forgive them. And so Jonah flees. He gets on a ship and heads in the opposite direction for Tarshish. God pursues. And God says, "Blow." He sends a great storm. He hurls a storm. And the pagan sailors on that boat, in great fear, each cry out to their own God. And then they learn that Jonah's God is the God of heaven and the earth and the seas. And they learn that this storm is the result of Jonah's disobedience. What should we do? Jonah says, "Throw." Throw me overboard into the sea, and the storm will cease. And when they finally do that, the storm is instantly stilled, and the sailors say, whoa, whoa, Jonah's God is this powerful, personal God. And these pagans begin to worship Jonah's God. Whoa. And that actually is the intent of the entire book, to bring people to that conclusion. So everybody say, whoa, whoa, this personal, powerful God. Okay, quick perspective on storm before we continue our study. Storms. Storms can arrive when we are disobedient. Perhaps the storm is external in our circumstances. Perhaps the storm is internal in our emotions. But storms can come. Storms in life are one of the ways that God disciplines us. But remember, the word discipline comes from the word disciple. God is teaching us through the storm. God uses storms to develop Christ-like character in us. God uses storms to make us more dependent upon Him. Sometimes storms don't have anything to do with our disobedience. Storms happen because we live in this fallen world. And God may not quiet the storm, but God can always bring quiet to His child. Okay? A stillness inside of us, because we know who's in control. I love that thought. He may not quiet the storm, but He can quiet the child. Okay, we continue. Where's Jonah? The sailors are going, whoa, and that's where our attention should be, on the great God. But what happened to Jonah? Imagine this is the first time you've ever heard this story. Jonah has been thrown into the sea. He's supposed to be the hero of the story. He's Israel's prophet. He's been thrown into the sea. The story continues. And now the Lord provided a huge fish, a great fish, to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. The Lord provided, and that word provided could be translated commissioned, or He appointed. It was a governing word. It was the word that a king would use if he were to appoint an ambassador, commission an ambassador. To go do something. And the word picture is kind of this. God says to the fish, fish, go. And the fish says, yes, Lord. And then God says, go, pick up Jonah. Directions will be given on an need-to-know basis, but this is important. Swallow, don't chew. Okay? Go get Jonah. God appointed a fish to swallow Jonah. We're actually going to settle just on this verse for most of the morning, because it's such an incredible statement, such an unbelievable occurrence, that it has been met with a sea of criticism. Outlandish, preposterous, inconceivable, unreasonable, ridiculous, the critics say. Some even say this is the Achilles heel of the Bible, this one verse. Maybe you've heard the agnostic hymn. It goes like this. It ain't necessarily so, it ain't necessarily so. The preacher is liable to teach you, but it just ain't necessarily so. And then the chorus is, Jonah lived in a whale. Jonah, he lived in a whale. He made his home in a fish's abdomen. Jonah lived in a whale. I didn't say it was a good song. I'm just saying that's the agnostic hymn. And it sort of sums it all up. Why does the skeptic not believe Jonah and the whale? How gullible you Christians are that you actually believe that. It is this verse that has caused many people to say, I'm sorry, I just can't take the Bible seriously. That's ridiculous. It's got to be allegory, or it's got to be myth, or it's got to be a parable. You can't expect me to believe that. And so the book has been ridiculed as sort of a fairy tale, fiction. It's just a kid's story for Sunday school. But could it have happened? Let's just consider that. One suggestion is that the great fish is the white shark, the great white shark. Dan and I hooked into that one our last fishing trip. A great white shark can grow up to 70 feet in length. From that wall to this wall is 50 feet. Gives you a little perspective. That's a big tuna. 70 feet long. The white shark has been known to swallow sea cows up to 1,000 pounds without a broken bone. Swallows it. Others say the great fish here in verse 17 is a whale, the sperm whale to be exact. And sperm whales, unusually, huge, and they will swallow large objects, including up to a 15-foot shark. They eat anything that moves, they swallow it whole. They've been known to swallow lumps of food 8 feet in diameter. Why would a whale be near a boat during a storm? Because the habits of some whales is to follow boats because they eat garbage. And when garbage is thrown overboard, there's the whale to eat it. And remember, earlier in the story, verse 5, I believe, they were throwing cargo overboard, throwing everything overboard to lighten the load, trying to spare themselves. Interesting story. Perhaps you've heard it before, about a man named James Bartley. He was a seaman on a British whaling ship. They were chasing sperm whale, hunting them off of the Falkland Islands, down by Argentina. A tail of one of these whales hit the boat, rendering it unstable. 2 men went overboard. 1 man drowned. Bartley was presumed missing at sea. They captured a whale, killed it, hoisted it on board, began cutting its oily flesh for harvest. At some point, the stomach was hoisted up. When the crew members noticed this sort of slight spasmodic movement, they proceeded cautiously. They knew it might be a shark. They cut inside, and out came Bartley, doubled up in a coma, unconscious but alive. They revived him. Wow. This is interesting. Because of the acidic gastric juices in the whale's stomach, Bartley's face and hands and neck were bleached white. Kind of the Michael Jackson effect. Okay? But very interesting. You just remember that as the story continues and you think about Jonah showing up in Nineveh, bleached white. Preaching God's judgment. I think they would have listened. Bartley remembers the ordeal. He lived to tell about his experience. He remembers being thrown overboard. He remembers a whooshing sound of being conveyed into this smooth conduit. He remembers the terrible darkness, the soft, slimy walls around him. He said there was plenty of air to breathe until he was unconscious. He also remembers the temperature being very hot. 104 degrees in the stomach of a whale's belly. He remembers the smell of rancid, decaying fish, and it's estimated that he was in the whale's stomach 18 hours. Here's a line drawing. I'm glad the date is on there. I was wondering about that. The New York World, as they reported the story, there's the line drawing from it, 1896. Bartley is buried in England now, and on his tombstone it says, a modern-day Jonah. Isn't that interesting? Doesn't necessarily prove anything, but could the story of Jonah happen? Scientifically, it could. It has happened. It's been documented. But the voices of skeptics and atheists are still not silenced. But even without the scientific plausibility of this happening, we know it could happen because God is involved. Okay? If God created the heavens and the earth, all of this, if he spoke it into existence, this is pretty small stuff. If God couldn't do this miracle, he's pretty impotent and certainly not worthy of our worship. But with God, all things are possible. And if he raised Jesus from the dead, I think he could keep a guy in storage inside of a fish for a little while. First week I used this quote from G. Campbell Morgan, and this is the heart of Jonah. He says, men have been looking so hard at the great fish that they have failed to see the great God in the book of Jonah. Jonah is not about a fish. It's not even about Jonah. It is about the great God, the God of mercy, the God of lavish grace, this God with a missionary heart for all people, a God with unrelenting love, a forgiving God, a patient God, a pursuing God, a powerful God, the Lord of heaven and earth, a God. That's what Jonah is about. Jesus, by the way, used Jonah as an example of the resurrection. This is an important verse in Matthew. And then some of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law said to Jesus, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." They had already seen so many signs. It was not about more proof. Their hearts were so hardened. They wanted a sign from heaven. And so Jesus answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." At the heart of the Christian faith is this claim of this historical event, Jesus' resurrection from the dead. The Christian faith rises and falls on the resurrection of Jesus. It doesn't rise or fall on the story of Jonah. It doesn't rise or fall, by the way, on the fact that we screw up so much sometimes. Because sometimes, the skeptic, the non-believer will want to point out all the flaws in your life as if that discredits Christianity. They want to point to everything as hypocrisy. And your response is just that. Christianity doesn't rise or fall on the performance of Christians. It rises or falls on the person of Jesus Christ, the historical resurrection. I'm a screw-up. I'm a sinner. I need a Savior. You're saying to the skeptic. And by the way, so do you. And I know someone who would do that. Okay, Christianity rises or falls on the resurrection of Jesus. But the fact that Jesus used Jonah as an illustration of the reality of the resurrection shows us that he believed that the story of Jonah was true and accurate. He used Jonah to refer to his own literal physical resurrection. And in doing so, he confirms Jonah's story as a historical event. Right? If Jesus was saying, verse 40, for as Jonah was figuratively or allegorically or fictitiously 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so I will be literally and physically, historically 3 days and 3 nights. And that makes that statement just nonsense. Yes, nonsense. And really no proof of what he is saying. Okay? So one more thing here. By the way, as you're discussing this with people, 3 days and 3 nights. In the Jewish understanding of time, their reckoning of time, and in the expressions of their day, and every culture has their own sort of idiomatic expressions. Theirs was 3 days and 3 nights. That could mean simply part of the first day, the second day, part of the third day, okay? Jesus was in the tomb Friday evening, crucifixion. He arose early Sunday morning. That's not 3 days and 3 nights. But in the Jewish understanding and in the Jewish expressions of the day, yes, it was 3 days and 3 nights. And so the point is, Jonah technically could have been in the whale's stomach 26 hours. Part of the first day, the second day, part of the third day. We don't know the exact number of time, but it doesn't literally have to mean 72 hours. So Jesus believed the story of Jonah and the fish. But again, if we get so focused on validating the story of the fish, we miss the great God. And Jonah is about the great God. So a couple quick lessons. We're going to wrap this up, but here's a couple lessons about this great God of the book of Jonah. And one is, flows all the way through the book, we see the heart of God for all people. God wants everyone to be saved. In order to see this, I'm going to back up to verse 11 and 12 in chapter 1. Remember the scene. And so they, the sailors, asked Jonah, "What shall we do to make the sea calm down for us?" They're crying out to each to their own God. Remember henotheism, we talked about that last week. They're tribal gods. They're gods of little localities. They discover that Jonah's God, the Lord of heaven and earth and the seas. They go, oh. And then they discover that Jonah has been disobedient to his God. And so they're going, Jonah, what should we do to make the seas calm down for us? Jonah's response, pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Not the best response. It is not what God wanted to hear. The best response would have been, what should we do? Boys, turn the boat around. I've changed my mind. I'm going to Nineveh. I'm going to preach. I'm going to obey God. The story would have been completely different. But Jonah says, throw me overboard. And underneath that, he is saying, I would rather die than go to Nineveh. I hate the wicked, evil Ninevites. I hate what they've done to our nation, to our people. I will not take them the news of salvation. That's what's behind this. Throw me into the sea. But as the story unfolds, Jonah goes, and the Ninevites, they respond to the message. And just as Jonah feared, the Ninevites then cry out for forgiveness. And God has compassion on them and forgives them. And so what we see in this story, and if you were a first-time Jewish reader of this story, this would have shocked you. Because again, Jonah is supposed to be the hero. He's the prophet of God. But what we see is the hero in the story has got such a hard heart. It's so filled with hatred. But his God is so compassionate and so loving. Because the story's not about Jonah, it's about this God. A God who 2 Peter 3 says is not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. That's God's heart. And then we draw the parallel. You and I have received a commission very similar to Jonah. Just as he was told to leave his place of comfort and go to Nineveh, Jesus tells us, the Great Commission verse, this time from Mark up here, Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel, the good news of salvation to all creation. That's our mission, church. That's what we're supposed to be about. And just think about that just for a moment. From the beginning of time, there have been 12 billion people, it's estimated, on this earth. Adam, Eve, 12 billion, okay? And today, over 6 billion people are alive. Over half the people who have ever lived are alive and inhabiting this planet right now, and that's our mission field. People who need to hear the good news of salvation through Jesus. And Jesus says, get out of the salt shaker. Be salt and light in this world. Go share the good news. God says, yeah, that's my heart, and it should be yours too. That's what we learn. This great God in the book of Jonah is a God with this incredible heart for all people, not wanting any to perish. And obeying the Great Commission, that's the measure. Whether it be we're measuring our own spiritual health or the health of a church, that's the measure. The measure of maturity and spiritual health, not the size of the building or how many people are in attendance. It's how seriously we take the Great Commission. How seriously we're involved in that statement. Bishop Ryle said this. I think I got this. Oh, thank you. The highest form of selfishness is when a man is content to go to heaven alone. Jonah, you're being very selfish. We can't really believe the doctrine of heaven and hell if we are content to go to heaven alone. We can't become a Jonah. That's the story. We can't become a Jonah. We're supposed to be like God, reflect the heart of God who has this intense love for all people, even wicked people, people who have done you wrong, the Ninevites. And one other piece that carries over through this book as well. But here's our God, our great God. He's a God who pursues us. An unrelenting God who chases after his little bunnies, who chases after his disobedient prophets until they finally come home. Jonah comes home next week, chapter 2. But the application is, it is never too late just to quit running away from God. You know, and maybe right now you're running in very obvious ways from God. Maybe you're running sort of in secret, hidden ways. Maybe a storm has hit. Maybe you're in the midst of that storm. Maybe you can see the storm on the horizon. The point is, don't wait for the storm to hit. Remember, God is pursuing. Don't ask to be thrown in the sea. Just obey. God is saying, come to me. You know, stop running. Come home to me. Yeah, that's pretty good. There is a little bit of Jonah in all of us. There really is. And we want to see that. Because when we see that, then we see our need for this great God that's in this book. Father, we need, and we're so grateful of your pursuit for us, your pursuit after us, your power to calm storms in our life, your passion for us, this unrelenting love. I just pray for a stillness now, that we can recognize you, that there would, as we leave, there would be a sense of, whoa, what a great God I have. I'm gonna stop fighting. I'm gonna start following. I'm gonna start praising you. However you apply that into all of our lives right now, we ask for your Spirit to bring that message home. And then as a body, we want to lift up Anne. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Just the sadness of reconciling all of life, and bring comfort to her, we pray, and healing. Thanks for her heart for evangelism. Use this to let her share the good news of Jesus with her family. I pray that in Jesus' name. Hey, let's stand. And we'll sing together. Boy, this is an appropriate song, because we got a God who rescues, and that's the story of Jonah. Sing along with